I'm Darryl, that's Rich, and this is a Caterham 7 165, the Euro-spec version of Caterham's brand new lightweight two-seater. This entry model is powered by a tiny 660cc three-cylinder turbocharged engine up front, banging out about 80 bhp. Now I know 80 horses doesn't sound a lot in this day and age, but here's the clever thing. This thing now only weighs 490 kilos. And that gives it about the same power to weight ratio as Golf GTI, Toyota GT86, and that's plenty to play with. The guys at Caterham claim that the 165 is a homage to those early 7s that Colin Chapman was knocking up in the 1950s. It's on steelies, 15-inch steelies and skinny tyres.
When was the last time you drove anything on steel wheels?
I honestly can't remember.
Most XCAR fans will probably know that this Caterham shares its DNA with a lightweight Lotus 7 racer of the 1950s. In fact, this latest model is the very embodiment of Lotus' famous simplicate and add lightness ethos.
Until the early 1970s, the Lotus 7 was the cash cow that was helping to keep the company afloat. And Lotus sold about 2,500 of these, mostly as complete knockdown kits. And that's because kit cars at the time were exempt from 25% purchase tax. And so for a pretty modest outlay, that meant that the average man could spanner together his own Lotus 7 in his own garden shed and take it racing at the weekend.
The only rule back then was that kit car manufacturers such as Lotus at the time were not allowed to include assembly instructions with their products. So Colin Chapman, who was really the master of bending the rules, included a disassembly manual with his kit. You just had to read it backwards.
However, when the UK finally joined the EEC in 1973, the kit car tax loophole was closed and Chapman sold the rights for his ageing 7 to Caterham so that he could focus on motor racing and road cars like the Elite and the Elan.
So there we are then, the short potted history of the Lotus 7 and its Caterham cousins. But the sharp-witted mathematicians out there might have spotted that something is missing from this Lotus family tree. Series don't normally start at number 7. So what happened to the early ancestors? What happened to the Lotuses numbered 1 through 6?
Well, to find the real origins of Lotus, you have to go quite a way further off the beaten track, literally, to some muddy woodland here in Kent. This is Sporting Trials, otherwise known as mud plugging, and we have just the man to introduce the sport.
My name is Ian Wright. I got into the sport of trialling through my parents and family. Trialling is simply the art of getting from the beginning of a section to the end of a section. There's no time involved, there's no speed involved. You go as fast or as slow as you like, but it is continuous forward motion. And where you fail is where you finish. Trialling is a peculiarly British sport. It was pre-war, but actually rose to huge success post-war when obviously all the airfields were bombed and race cars were all locked away and buried in garages. So all the top racing drivers of the day went trialling. So, you know, the Sterling Mosses and Graham Hills of this world and Colin Chapman's trialling was their forte. So I used to be picked up from school in the red car in the middle because it was my mother's, it was our second car. So picked up from school during the week and trialling on Sundays. And that carried on through till I was 16 or 17. Then I decided to build my own car. So trialling's absolutely in my blood and have been British champion a couple of times. The fully red Canon is my favourite as far as a historic trials car is concerned because it's absolutely pure. We built and designed the Sherpa. Having built it, it is absolutely the pinnacle of the sport today, but it's very expensive, it's very specialised, it's quite tricky to drive, and possibly has slightly spoilt the sport. Because the cars aren't amazingly user-friendly and are so capable, people can get into big trouble in them. Every car has continuously had a big effect on power to weight ratio. Now we're going up to 120 horsepower in a car that weighs 350 kilos.
Well, that looks like fun. It looks to me like a cross between green laning, WRC and trench warfare. What's the knack to winning?
First, being a good driver and reading the ground. You know, you have to have a sort of a kind of an earthy understanding of driving. I guess a little bit like a rally driver. I mean, there used to be an enormous amount of trials on television. You know, Sunday grandstand.
Yeah.
You had trials cars versus army vehicles. You know, trials cars were absolutely
So when was the heyday then, would you say?
I think the heyday, as far as the public was concerned, had to be the 60s. Whilst it can be a little bit perceived as cloth hat and barber coat, when as soon as people jump behind the wheel and have a go, they're just totally hooked by it.
This is kind of Gore-Tex and the Caterham is Nomex.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
People like the idea that the old cars were road going, and they imagine that they're going to pop down the pub and pop round to their mates. In reality, they drive it a few miles a minute. It's pretty crude. But of course, if you look back through all the old Autosports and motoring newses, you can see these cars and you can say, oh, that was my car. Look, there it is. The kind of people who are getting into historic trials like the association to history.
Ian put us through our paces in various machines plucked from his fleet of historic and modern trials car. The real art to this sport is reading the ground in front of you, working out your angles of attack, knowing when to blast it and when to trickle along on minimum throttle. Then on top of that, you've got to fiddle the independent braked rear wheels like some sort of human traction control. Great fun, but a lot to take on board. This is a thinking man's motorsport. Right, so Ian's let us loose in his family heirloom. Can you believe that this used to be the family's second car?
What are you doing now?
I think I've gone the wrong way. Left now.
There's a definite knack to this. The fact that you've got three handbrakes, essentially, there's two down here too.
One of them's wedged in my inner thigh there. I don't think it was designed for big butch chaps like me.
It seems to be trying to balance grip and momentum. We're still not sure what we're doing.
I don't know what I'm doing, really.
You're like Senna in a trench, you are. Give me the beats.
No, I'm trickling, man. But it's quite hard to believe that this shares its DNA with that Caterham we were in earlier.
So how are these trials cars related to modern day Caterhams?
Now you might be surprised to know that Colin Chapman's first foray into motorsport wasn't in the glamorous world of Grand Prix and circuit racing, it was actually trialling. And while he was still at university, he thought he'd have a bash at it, and he took a decrepit 1930s Austin 7 chassis, chopped the top off it, built a new body out of alloy reinforced plywood, and after a year of hammering in the back of his girlfriend's shed, not a euphemism, he launched the Lotus 1.
Go on.
Which looked a bit of a pig by all accounts, like Postman Pat's van.
But it was one hell of a trials car. Well, after Colin Chapman had mastered this, his second trials car was the Lotus 2, and in that he actually took it circuit racing, and in June 1950 he entered a race at Silverstone, and one of the other cars was actually a Bugatti Type 37, quite a handy car, and he actually brought the car home for a win, and that marked the turning point for Chapman when he got into circuit racing and Formula 1. And the rest is history.
But he didn't stop there. He did build 2 more specials. He built a Lotus 4, which was for his first paying customer actually, which bankrolled him to then develop the Lotus 6. In 1952, the 6 became Lotus's first production car. Aimed at the clubman racer, it was built around a light space frame chassis and soon became a common sight at British circuit races and hill climb courses, often embarrassing far more expensive machines. However, trialling was still in Chapman's blood and he couldn't resist tinkering with the prototype Lotus 6 chassis that happened to be knocking around the workshop to build the ultimate lightweight trials car and go mud plugging for one last time. And this is that very car, Lotus 6 chassis number 1. In evolutionary terms, this is like the missing link. It was their last foray into sporting trials with its beefed up front end. It did very well and won a number of trophies, but by this time it was becoming quite clear that Colin Chapman's interests lay elsewhere.
The other 109 Lotus 6 that were eventually built were strictly sports cars, and after 5 years of development, the 6 evolved into the famous Lotus 7, a brilliant, affordable, old-school 2-seater whose spirit thankfully lives on in models like the Caterham 165.
So there we are, that's the complete family tree. It might seem strange that cars as diverse as the Sherpa and the Caterham are related, but they are, and they owe their success to their mudslinging ancestors.